March 12, 1942, North Atlantic 300 miles southwest of Iceland. The night was black enough to erase the horizon. The sea and the sky were the same color, ink, endless and heavy. The wind had died to a whisper, leaving only the slow roll of the Atlantic swells rising and falling like the breath of something ancient. Beneath it all, 60 meters below the surface, a narrow gray shape glided through the dark. U-569, a German Type 60 U-boat, moved on battery power, slow, silent, blind. Inside her steel shell, 29 men lived elbow to elbow in a world the size of a freight car. The air was warm and stale, thick with the smell of oil, wet clothes, and unwashed bodies. The walls sweated with condensation. In the control room, pale bulbs flickered under metal cages, barely cutting through the gloom. At the center of it all stood Oberleutnant Sir C. Hans-Dieter Graf, 28 years old, gaunt from weeks at sea, a cigarette clamped between his teeth. The smoke didn't rise, it lingered, trapped like everything else inside this steel coffin. He leaned over the plotting table, tracing a finger across a grease pencil line that marked their patrol route along the convoy lanes. The last message from U-boat command in Lorient had warned of heavy escort presence. Graf had ignored it. He was confident, experienced. His men trusted him completely. To the crew, Graf was more than an officer. He was the man who had brought them home every time. The lucky boat, they called U-569. But tonight even luck seemed to hold its breath. In the forward torpedo room, Mattress Snowbergefreiter Dieter Koch was writing a letter to his mother by the faint red glow of a maintenance light. His handwriting shook with the gentle motion of the sea. Mutti, everything is quiet now. The sea feels like glass. We haven't seen a ship in days. Sometimes I think we are the only men left in the world. He folded the note carefully and tucked it into his breast pocket. He knew it might never reach her. In the control room, the hydrophone operator, Funker Karl Hoffmann, sat motionless, headphones pressed tight to his ears. Static whispered in the background. Every so often he would tilt his head, adjust a dial, and listen again. Then something new. Ping. A metallic note, faint but unmistakable, echoed through the hull. Sharp, clean, artificial. Karl frowned, twisting the gain knob. Again the sound came. Ping. A second later. Ping. He straightened, raising a hand. Herr Oberleutnant? Graf turned, cigarette tip glowing red in the dim light. Was istus? Karl hesitated. A sound, repeating, like a bell underwater. The men within earshot chuckled. One of them muttered, "Maybe the English are calling the fish to church." Laughter rippled through the cramped compartment, small and nervous. Graf smirked, tapping ash onto the deck. Ignore it. Probably an echo from our own propellers. But Karl wasn't convinced. He adjusted the frequency, narrowing the range. The sound was too precise, too deliberate. A pulse, consistent, measured, man-made. Ping. The note rang through the hull again, faint but clear. Coming from the west, Karl whispered. Graf waved it off. We'll surface at dawn, recharge the batteries, check our bearings. He turned to his engineer, Lieutenant Walter Reimann. Any sign of convoy traffic? Nothing yet, Walter replied. We're in the dead zone, Herr Oberleutnant. Too far for aircraft, too deep for trouble. Graf nodded. Then we rest, silent running until morning. The engines hummed softly as the U-boat glided on through the abyss. The laughter faded. The crew returned to their routines, checking gauges, wiping condensation, whispering quietly about home. But Karl couldn't forget the sound. He stared at the dials, headphones pressed close, waiting. Above them, the sea stretched in all directions, a cold wilderness hiding its hunters. And far overhead, invisible in the darkness, the British destroyer HMS Westcott moved slowly in a broad arc, its ASDIC transducer sending sound waves into the deep, an invisible web of noise that searched for steel. Range 2,000 yards, the sonar operator reported. Echo consistent, submerged contact. Lieutenant Commander Arthur Holliday leaned over the operator's shoulder, eyes narrowing. Hold course, maintain contact. The destroyer turned slightly, its wake spreading out across the calm water. Below, inside U-569, the faint rhythm returned. Ping, 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 each note bouncing off the steel hull, echoing through the silence like a heartbeat in the dark. Graf looked up, frowning. Again. Karl nodded, face pale. Louder this time. Closer. Graf's jaw tightened. Keep listening. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The sound seemed harmless, until it wasn't. None of them knew it yet, but this was the beginning of a new kind of war. The sea, their greatest ally, had started to betray them. For the first time in years, the hunters of the Atlantic were being hunted back. Ping. The sound carried deep through the ocean, announcing the end of silence. The pings grew sharper, more insistent. Each metallic note sliced through the water and through the nerves of every man aboard U-569. Ping, ping, ping. The rhythm was precise, like a metronome of death keeping time in the dark. Inside the control room, the air had turned stifling. Condensation rolled down every steel surface, dripping onto faces, instruments, and the navigation charts that were already damp from weeks of humidity. The red emergency lights painted everyone in a ghostly hue. Hans-Dieter Graf stood perfectly still. His eyes darted to the sound operator, Karl Hoffmann, who was hunched over his dials like a priest before an altar. "How far?" Graf asked. Karl swallowed. "Hard to tell. Maybe 2,000 meters, maybe less. But it's steady. It's searching for us, Herr Oberleutnant." "Depth." Walter Reimann, the engineer, glanced at the gauge. 60 meters and holding. Graf's voice was quiet, clipped. All motors off, silent running. At once, switches clicked, and the low hum of the electric engines faded into absolute silence. Fans stopped turning. The usual mechanical life of the submarine died out, leaving only the soft creak of metal and the breathing of 29 men. "Blow out lamps in crew quarters," Graf ordered. "Minimal power only." The darkness deepened until the men could barely see each other's outlines. A drop of water fell from a pipe and struck the deck with an echo that seemed deafening. For 5 full minutes, nothing happened, only the pings. Then came a new sound, a distant thrumming, slow but growing louder. "Propellers, heavy ones. They're above us," Karl whispered. Graf's mind raced. He could picture it in his head, the destroyer cutting through the black water, its ASDIC beam sweeping like a lighthouse below the surface. "Stay calm," he said quietly. "They can't know what they've found. Maybe they think we're a whale, or wreckage." But in his gut he knew better. Above the surface, HMS Westcott Lieutenant Commander Arthur Halliday stood on the open bridge, wind lashing his coat. The Atlantic stretched to every horizon, gray and endless, but his ears were tuned only to the headset crackling at his side. "Contact bearing steady, sir," said his sonar operator through the static. Clean echo, definite submarine. Halliday's jaw set. He'd been chasing these ghosts for months, always hearing them, never catching them, but this contact felt different. Solid, persistent, alive. "Helm, bring us to bearing 085, speed 8 knots. Prepare for a depth charge run." The deck beneath him trembled as the destroyer's propellers bit into the water. Sailors hurried to the rails, unlocking the depth charge racks. Each steel drum weighed 200 kilograms, packed with TNT and equipped with a hydrostatic fuse that would trigger at 75 meters. "Pattern B," Halliday called out. 12 charge drop, double staggered. His voice was calm, but his men could hear the tension under it. They'd lost 2 merchant ships that week to torpedoes. Somewhere under these waves was the predator that had killed their friends. Tonight they would answer. The sonar operator's voice rose again. "Range closing, 1,500 yards, sir." Halliday nodded once. "Release on my mark." Below U-569, Graf heard the destroyer before he felt it. The propeller's rhythm rolled through the hull like thunder through bones. Every man froze. "They're right above us," whispered Walter. Graf lifted a finger to his lips. "Hold steady. No movement. No noise." The pings came faster now, louder, filling the hull until it felt as if the sound itself had mass. Karl flinched with each one. Suddenly, the pings stopped. Silence. That silence was worse than noise. Everyone knew what it meant. Graf braced himself against the periscope column and shouted, "Brace." The first explosion ripped through the deep. It was not a single sound. It was a wall of noise, a blunt force that slammed into the hull with a violence that made every rib of the ship groan. The lights flickered, went out, and came back dimmer. A wrench clattered to the deck. Someone screamed. Then another explosion. Closer, louder. The shockwave smashed through the submarine's spine, throwing men against bulkheads. A glass gauge shattered, spraying fragments across the console. Walter yelled over the roar. "Minor leak aft." Pressure spiked but holding. Graf grabbed the nearest handrail, feeling the vibration through his palms. The smell of ozone and battery acid filled the air. "Report," he shouted. "Trim intact, steering functional, but they're right on top of us, Herr Oberleutnant." Karl ripped off his headphones, face slick with sweat. "The pings, they're coming back again. Closer. They know where we are." Graf stared into the darkness. He didn't yet understand how, but he understood what. They were being tracked through the water itself. The unseen enemy above was listening. Above them, Halliday's operator smiled grimly at the glowing blip on his ASDIC scope. "Target still alive, sir. Bearing steady." Halliday's answer was simple. "We go again. Reload the racks." The destroyer turned for another pass. Below, U-569 waited in the crushing dark, every man listening to that terrible rhythm resume. Ping, ping, ping. It was no longer just a sound. It was a sentence being pronounced. The sea was no longer an ocean. It was a cage closing in. U-569 had dived beyond its comfort zone, chasing shadows and silence, while death pulsed above in perfect intervals. Ping, ping, ping.
Each note was clearer, almost mocking, like the steady tick of a clock counting down. Graf wiped condensation from his brow and stared at the depth gauge. 80 meters, 90. The hull groaned under the weight. He could hear it, metal flexing, rivets whining, the ancient song of pressure. Hold depth at 100 meters, he said quietly. Trim level. We go no deeper unless we must. Walter Ryman, his engineer, adjusted the trim wheels, sweat running down his temple. The helmsman's hands shook on the dive planes. The entire crew had gone quiet. No jokes now, no whispered prayers. Even the smallest sound could betray them. Above, the destroyer HMS Westcott had already turned for its second run. Halliday's voice cut through the bridge chatter. Contact steady. Prepare pattern C. Fuse at 100 meters. Pattern C. Aye, came the answer. The British sailors worked fast, pulling safety pins, setting depth rings, and rolling the next set of heavy steel drums into position. 12 charges waited like thunderbolts on a leash. Halliday turned to his sonar operator. Maintain contact during the run. Keep that echo solid. Aye, sir. Bearing unchanged. He glanced at the sea, a vast slate-gray plain under low clouds. No sign of the submarine, only the cold wind and the rhythmic ping pulsing through the ship's hull. Each sound came back a little stronger, a little sharper. They were close. Halliday's tone softened, almost reverent. Let's bring her down, gentlemen. Below, inside U-569, the pings became unbearable. The sound seemed to pierce their skulls, echoing through every pipe and bulkhead. Carl Hoffman, at the hydrophone, muttered under his breath. They never lose us. Every time we stop hearing them, they come back stronger. Graf nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the chart table. It's not luck. They've found a way to see through the dark. Then it happened. The first explosion slammed into the hull, a burst of lightless thunder that shook the submarine from bow to stern. The red emergency lamps flickered, then stabilized, swinging wildly with the motion. The men were thrown from their posts. A mug shattered against the steel floor. Dust and rust rained down from above. Someone screamed as a pipe split open, spraying freezing water across the compartment. Pressure hull intact, Walter shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. No structural breach yet. Another detonation, then another. Then 4 at once. The submarine twisted violently, creaking as though it might snap in two. The noise was beyond sound. It was a living force, a roar that came from all directions. Depth 110 meters, yelled the helmsman. Graf grabbed the periscope column for balance, his knuckles white. Compensate, hold her steady. The gauges trembled, battery voltage dropping, oxygen thinning, sweat and salt water mixed on every face. In the torpedo room, Matras and Koch clutched the photo of his mother in his pocket, whispering a prayer he barely remembered from childhood. In the engine room, 2 men worked in darkness, hands slick with oil, tightening bolts that rattled loose from the blast. A third explosion, closer still. The submarine lurched downward. Metal screeched. The lights went out completely. The only illumination came from the faint red glow of emergency lamps flickering back to life. Karl's voice trembled as he spoke into the quiet. Herr Oberleutnant, it's moving again. The ping. They're adjusting. Graf forced a calm he didn't feel. They're measuring us. Each ping gives them our depth, our speed, our course. They know we're still alive. He thought of the old instructor at the submarine school in Kiel, the one who'd warned them years ago. Sound is the ocean's gossip, boys. It tells every secret you make. Graf had laughed then. He wasn't laughing now. He turned to Walter. We can't outweight them. We'll change depth slowly. 1 meter per second. Hard to starboard. Maybe we slip under their beam. The engineer nodded and signaled the dive planes. The submarine adjusted its course, just enough to break the reflection of the sonar. Above them, HMS Westcott's sonar operator frowned. Contact fading, sir. The echo's weaker. Halliday narrowed his eyes. He's diving deeper. He thinks he can vanish. He looked at the clock, then back at his men. He's wrong. He grabbed the intercom. Helm, come about 10 degrees to port. Depth charge pattern D, set for 120 meters. Aye, sir. On the surface, the ocean came alive with violence. The destroyer dropped its new load of explosives in a perfect arc, the charges falling one after another like iron rain. Beneath, the crew of U-569 braced for impact. Graf could hear the muffled splash of the descending drums through the hull. He clenched his teeth and closed his eyes. Then whump, 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 whump. The submarine shook as if struck by a giant's fist. Panels burst open. Sparks flared. Gauges shattered. Men were thrown to the floor. Walter shouted, aft ballast tank damaged. Taking on water. Seal it. Graf barked. 2 sailors scrambled aft, fighting against a torrent of icy seawater pouring through a cracked seam. One of them slipped, hit the deck hard, but pulled himself up and slammed the valve shut. The compartment filled with the hiss of leaking air, the groan of bending metal. Graf steadied himself and shouted over the din. Damage report. Walter's face was white. Pressure holding, but we're close to the limit. Another hit like that and she'll split. Graf's gaze moved to Carl. The ping. Carl nodded, voice trembling. Still there, but softer. They've turned away, maybe for another run. Graf exhaled slowly. His heart pounded in rhythm with that haunting sound. Silent running again. We'll make them think we're gone. The crew obeyed instantly. Every motion slowed. Every sound strangled. The U-boat became a shadow again, slipping deeper into the dark. But in the ocean above, HMS Westcott was already turning. Holiday lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, the first in hours. He exhaled through his teeth. He's a clever one, but he can't hide forever. The sonar pulse fired again. Ping, ping. Below, in the red-lit tomb of U-569, men froze as that sound pierced the dark once more. Graf whispered, "You can't hide from sound." Then came another blast, closer than ever. The entire submarine screamed in agony, as if the ocean itself was tearing it apart. And in that moment, every man aboard understood that the ocean no longer belonged to them. The depth gauge trembled as if afraid to move. The needle quivered at 130 meters, dangerously close to the red zone marked in faded paint. The hull groaned like a wounded animal. Every sound, the creak of a bolt, the pop of a rivet, felt like the ocean whispering, "Enough." The air inside U-569 had turned sour. Batteries leaked fumes. Men coughed through shirts tied over their mouths. Sweat and salt water mixed on the floor, pooling under their boots. Hans-Dieter Graf leaned against the periscope column, the metal cold against his forehead. His voice was steady, but his eyes told the truth. "Trim the bow down 2 degrees. Hold her steady. No sudden moves." Lieutenant Walter Raimann's hands shook as he worked the trim controls. "Aye, Herr Oberleutnant. Bow down 2. A loud bang echoed from the forward compartment, followed by a hiss. The submarine tilted slightly to port. "Leak in the forward ballast tank," came the shout from the torpedo room. Graf straightened. "Close the forward vent valves. Pump air, slowly." The hiss grew into a roar before dying down again. The crew exhaled, but only slightly. Their relief was always temporary now. Then came the sound they feared most. Ping, ping, ping. Closer than ever. Faster. Karl Hoffmann's hands trembled over the hydrophone controls. "Herr Oberleutnant, they've got us again." Directly above. Graf said nothing for a long moment. The men watched him, waiting for orders, for reassurance, for anything. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper.
"They've found us again." Above, HMS Westcott rain slashed across the deck. The destroyer rose and fell with the swell, its bow cutting clean through the waves. The North Atlantic had turned savage. Lieutenant Commander Arthur Halliday stood braced against the wind on the open bridge. Water streamed off his coat, his gloved hands gripping the rail. "Bearing steady," he called. "Steady, sir," replied the sonar operator, his voice crackling over the intercom. "Echo is solid, 130 meters." Holiday nodded, the decision already made. "Pattern Delta, fuse for 150. Let's finish it." The deck crew moved fast, their boots clanging on the wet steel. Depth charges, huge black drums stenciled with danger explosive, were rolled into their tracks. The night air smelled of cordite and diesel. "Ready," shouted the chief petty officer. Holiday raised his hand. "Fire." One by one, the charges plunged into the sea. To the men on deck, they vanished quietly, swallowed by darkness. But below, each falling drum sounded like the ticking of a clock running out. Below, inside U-569, Graf heard the first splash through the hull, then the second, then the third. "Brace," he shouted. The first detonation hit like the hand of God. The submarine bucked violently, throwing men to the deck. Tools, mugs, and charts flew through the air. The red lights flickered, died, then flared again. A pipe burst above the navigation table, spraying a fine mist of seawater across the instruments. The air filled with smoke and salt. "Damage in the aft section," Walter yelled. "We're taking water, pumps failing." Graf steadied himself on a handrail slick with condensation. "Seal it off. Do what you can." More explosions followed in rapid succession, a rolling chorus that felt endless. The sound wasn't just around them, it was inside them. The shock waves pressed against their lungs and hearts. In the torpedo room, Koch clung to the bulkhead, water sloshing around his ankles. His letter to his mother floated past him, soaked and unreadable. In the engine compartment, 2 sailors worked blindly with wrenches, their fingers numb and raw. The waterline was rising by the minute. Graf grabbed the speaking tube. "All compartments, damage control. Report, only static." He turned to Carl, who was still at his post, white-faced, listening through his headphones. "Can you still hear it?" Carl nodded. "The ping's changing. It's moving in a circle. They're turning over us again." Graf slammed his fist into the bulkhead. "They can see us through the water, through everything." For a moment no one spoke. The truth hung in the air, heavier than the ocean above them. Walter whispered, "Battery voltage is collapsing. Oxygen's dropping fast. At this rate we'll lose propulsion." Graf looked at his men. The same faces that had laughed an hour earlier when the ping was just a curiosity. Now eyes hollow, they watched him for something. Hope, anger, faith, anything. He spoke quietly, but with resolve. We fake our death. Release oil and debris from the aft tanks. Make it look like we're finished. Walter blinked. A deception. Graf nodded. They want proof. Let's give them one. They worked quickly. A vent valve was opened, releasing oil from storage. Broken wood crates, torn fabric, and even a sailor's spare boot were fed into the drainage chute. The current carried the debris upward through the dark column of water. Minutes passed like hours. Every man watched the depth gauge. The ping grew fainter. Then it stopped. Above them, HMS Westcott slowed to a crawl. "Oil slick on the surface, sir," came the cry from the lookout. Holiday lifted his binoculars. Through the mist and rain, he saw it, a spreading black stain on the waves. "Looks heavy," said the helmsman. "Could be from a ruptured tank." Holiday studied it for another long moment. The sonar operator's voice crackled again. "No contact, sir. The echo's gone." The commander exhaled through his nose. "Mark the kill. Maintain convoy escort course." The destroyer turned slowly away, the roar of her engines fading into the storm. Below, inside U-569, silence. Graf didn't move. No one did. The only sound was dripping water and the slow creak of cooling metal. "They're gone," Walter said finally, disbelief in his voice. Graf nodded once. For now. The men collapsed where they stood, against bulkheads beside pumps, over the chart table. Someone wept quietly in the dark. Graf leaned back, staring up at the sweating steel above him. "The sea used to protect us," he murmured. "Now it betrays us with every sound." The ping was gone, but its echo remained in their bones. That night, U-569 drifted slowly through the black water, her crew too exhausted to celebrate survival. The Atlantic above was calm again, silent, but to them, that silence had become something else. It was no longer safety. It was the pause between storms. Ping. Even in memory, the sound haunted them. 2 days later, the North Atlantic turned to glass. The storm passed, leaving only gray stillness, a sea so calm it felt like mockery. U-569 drifted just beneath the surface, its diesel engines dead, batteries drained, air fouled and thin. Every breath was heavy. Hans-Dieter Graf sat in the control room, his beard untrimmed, his eyes sunk deep into their sockets. The crew around him were ghosts, faces drawn, uniforms damp with sweat, lips pale. Some had begun to hallucinate. One sailor swore he heard church bells beneath the sea. Walter Ryman crouched by the gauge panel, his hands shaking from exhaustion. "Battery charge at 10%, he said. "If we don't surface soon, we lose lights and pumps." Graf nodded. "Surface at dusk." The men said nothing, but their eyes spoke what none dared to. Surfacing meant exposure, and exposure meant death. Dusk, March 14th, 1942. The Atlantic horizon glowed faintly orange under a bruised sky. Graf gave the order. The ballast tanks hissed, and the boat rose through the layers of darkness until the conning tower broke the surface with a muted splash. Cold wind poured into the submarine like new life. One by one, sailors climbed to the bridge, faces tilted upward, gasping the open air as if it were salvation itself. The stars emerged, scattered and sharp, reflected in the dark sea like shards of glass. Walter leaned over the diesel controls. Engines online. The U-boat's twin diesels coughed, sputtered, then caught. The deck vibrated under their feet as the exhaust belched black smoke into the night. For the first time in 40 hours, the men heard something other than pings and explosions. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. Koch, the young sailor who had written to his mother, stood at the bow, eyes closed, whispering to himself. Graf climbed up beside him, lighting a cigarette that trembled in the wind. For a long time, he said nothing. Then quietly, "You did well, all of you. We were lucky." "Do you think they believed it?" Koch asked. Graf nodded, blowing smoke toward the horizon. "They believed what they wanted to, and that saved us." The men didn't cheer. They were too tired for that. Instead, they stood silently on the deck, watching the pale moon rise over the Atlantic, listening to the hum of their engines and the hiss of the sea. Aboard HMS Westcott, the same night, Lieutenant Commander Arthur Halliday stood in his cabin, a cup of tea cooling beside a chart covered in pencil marks. His sonar officer entered quietly. "No more echoes since the last run, sir. Oil slick still visible. HQ confirmed probable kill." Halliday nodded slowly. He should have felt triumph, another U-boat destroyed, another convoy safe, but the image of the spreading oil slick haunted him. "Probable," he repeated. "The sea hides the truth, as always." The young officer hesitated. "Do you think they suffer much down there, sir?" Halliday looked up from his map. "Everyone suffers in this ocean. Some just do it longer." He turned toward the porthole. The night outside was calm again. No pings, no echoes, just silence. "Still," he added quietly, "the silence feels wrong." Weeks later,
Lorient, France. U-569 limped back to port. The dock workers stared as the battered submarine entered the pen, scarred, scorched, oil-streaked, but alive. Graf saluted the flag as they moored, though his arm shook as he did. When he stepped onto the pier, a group of officers awaited him. One of them, a communications captain from headquarters, handed him a fresh directive. Orders from Donitz himself, the man said. New Allied technology in play. Sonar, they call it. They can locate submarines through sound. Effective range, 2,000 meters and growing. Graf took the paper, reading in silence. His throat felt dry. Sound, he murmured. So it's true. The officer nodded grimly. Yes, we'll be issuing rubber coatings for hulls, baffles, new tactics. But understand this. He lowered his voice. The Atlantic is no longer ours. Graf said nothing. He looked down at the slick oil on the water, shimmering like spilled blood. Later that night, in his cabin, he opened his logbook and wrote the final entry of that patrol, March 17, 1942. We survived by illusion. The sea that once guarded us now carries our voices to the enemy. We live in a world of echoes. The ocean has ears. He closed the book, blew out the lamp, and sat in the dark. Outside, the rhythmic sounds of shipyards filled the air, hammering, welding, drilling, the sounds of men still believing they could command the sea. 1 year later, the Atlantic, 1943. The rumor of the ping spread like wildfire through the U-boat fleet. New recruits learned to recognize it before they even sailed. Veterans called it der Klopfer, the knocker. They said when you heard it, you had 2 minutes left to live. In mess halls and bunks, men whispered about it in the dark. They can hear us breathe. They can hear our hearts. The ocean belongs to them now. By the summer of 1943, the statistics told the truth. Nearly half of all U-boats sent to the Atlantic never returned. Convoys, once helpless, now sailed in coordinated defense grids guided by ASDIC and radar. The war beneath the waves was over. It just hadn't realized it yet. Final patrol of U-569. In May 1943, Graf's luck ran out. Somewhere north of the Azores, his submarine was spotted by a British aircraft. Depth charges dropped within seconds. When the destroyers arrived, ASDIC locked onto the wounded U-boat's hull. For 2 hours, the crew fought the inevitable, patching leaks, praying, cursing, refusing to die quietly. But when the last ping came, they knew. Graf ordered the scuttling valves opened. He stood at the periscope one last time, watching the rising air bubbles shimmer like ghosts toward the surface. The sea listens, he said softly. Let it remember us. The hull cracked. The lights went out. And then there was nothing but the deep. Epilogue. London, 1951. 9 years later, in a quiet room of the Imperial War Museum, Arthur Halliday stood before a display case. Inside sat an old ASDIC console, the same model his crew had used aboard HMS Westcott. The attendant beside him smiled politely. Remarkable technology for its time, sir. Changed the course of the war. Halliday didn't answer immediately. He reached out, touching the metal rim of the sonar scope with his fingertips. It was cold. In the corner of the exhibit, a speaker played a recording for visitors, the faint rhythmic sound of sonar pulses. Ping, ping, ping. The tourists barely noticed. To them it was just a curiosity, a museum sound effect. But to Halliday it wasn't sound, it was memory. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he could smell the salt again, hear the thunder of explosions, see the faces of his crew lit by the red glow of the bridge lamps. He whispered, "I can still hear them," and then he walked away. The recording continued, echoing softly in the empty gallery. Ping, 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 an eternal heartbeat of a war fought in silence, where victory had no cheers and death no witnesses. The sea, once silent, never stopped speaking.